Good morning and welcome. The name of this talk is Free Indeed. Okay, I'd just like to start with a prayer. Father, I just pray that you'd give me your words, and Lord, that you'd help us to have hearts that are open to what you're saying. Amen. John 8, 3-11. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in their midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law of Moses, he commanded us to stone such women. What do you say about her?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the eldest, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus looked up and said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and do not sin again." For this woman to be caught in the act, the Pharisees had to do their due diligence. They, in regard to the law, it wasn't enough to have compromising circumstances. They actually had to catch someone in the act. Jewish law required witnesses who had seen the act. This must have taken some planning. Can you imagine? They weren't concerned about upholding the law. That's not what this is about. She was just a means to an end. She was just bait. For the woman, this must have been the worst moment of her life. She's humiliated, firstly by being sought out and watched to be caught in the act, then being manhandled and dragged who knows what distance, probably through a village, to be used as a test case to trap Jesus, to prove a point. It says they made her stand there. Now, whatever the state of this woman's clothing, she was naked. She's totally uncovered. She's exposed. There's no way to cover her shame. Whatever dignity that this woman might have had, it's been stripped from her. And in the eyes of those who have brought her there, she's worthless. She's nothing. In the worst moment of her life, God reveals himself. Here she is, she's facing judgment. She has no defense. She's guilty and she's facing the death penalty. In this worst of moments, Jesus, God, reveals himself as mercy. First, he gives her dignity. He calls her woman. This is a sign of respect. It's the title that he used for his mother at the wedding feast of Cana. Some translations, sometimes it's translated, "dear woman." It's not well translated into English, but it is a sign of respect. Jesus confronts her confused accusers and the crowd. He says, "Let the man among you who has no sin cast the first stone." Who's the only one who qualifies? As the sinless one, he qualifies as judge, as jury, and as executioner. There's a death penalty involved. This brings us to the point that Jesus is the only one qualified to condemn. Not just the woman. He's the only one qualified to condemn any of us. There's no one else who has the qualifications. He says, "Has no one condemned you? Neither do I condemn you." He doesn't dispute her guilt. He doesn't excuse her sin. He tells her to avoid the sin. The facts haven't changed. The verdict, however, has changed. And she receives a pardon. Jesus hasn't excused this woman. He hasn't excused her sin. He's forgiven her. And there's a difference. In Genesis, we read that when Adam and Eve sinned, the first thing they did was to hide from God, to cover their shame. They used fig leaves. It's now part of our nature that our first reaction, when guilty, is to cover ourselves. While we all hope to meet the Lord face to face, no one wants to meet God naked, guilty, humiliated, and ashamed. We don't want to meet him like that. And yet, this is the very moment that God chooses. Do you have a worst moment? I do. I have lots. We all have our worst moments, even apostles. Let's look at Peter the rock. The rock on which Jesus said he would build his church. He's walked, talked, eaten with Jesus daily for 3 years. He's an intimate and trusted friend. He's seen the miracles. He's had revelation about Jesus, that he's the Messiah. He sees Jesus transfigured in glory. And he declares that he would sooner die than deny Jesus. But within a couple of hours of making that statement, not under torture, not under pressure, but at the inquiry of a servant girl, Peter denies Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. He's adamant. I do not know the man. This is the man to whom Jesus entrusted the keys of the kingdom. This is Peter's worst moment. As the cock crows, Jesus makes eye contact. Peter weeps, exposed, ashamed, humiliated. I wonder how Peter felt when he found that Jesus had risen from the dead, or he looked in the empty tomb? Was he excited about meeting Jesus again, or was he apprehensive? He's denied him. How's he going to face Jesus? On their third meeting after the resurrection, Jesus reinstates Peter. Peter meets Jesus face to face in mercy. Mercy is just a concept, a beautiful idea, until we're actually on the receiving end of mercy. Then it's life-changing. All we need to do to meet Jesus, we all need to meet Jesus in our worst moment. But of course, our first reaction is to run, to hide, to cover up, excuse ourselves, or avoid the meeting. Another apostle, Judas. His worst moment wasn't all that different to to Peter's. But Judas never wanted to face Jesus ever again. Overwhelmed by guilt, shame, humiliation, Judas cannot accept mercy. And he pronounces judgment on himself. He becomes judge, jury, and executioner. None of us are able to forgive ourselves without first accepting forgiveness. But even when we're forgiven, we can still hold out. In 1829, George Wilson and an accomplice received death sentences for murder and robbing mail trains. His accomplice quickly took a trip to the gallows. But Wilson had influential friends in Washington. These friends besieged Andrew Jackson, the president, for leniency on behalf of their friend. And Jackson relented. In 1830, Wilson was pardoned. It sounded like great news for Wilson. But when the authorities presented the pardon, Wilson refused to accept it. In fact, they opened the prison door, gave him the pardon, and left the door open. He was a free man. But Wilson never left his cell. After some months and after much legal back and forth, Wilson's case went before the Supreme Court, and in United States versus Wilson, the court stated, "A pardon is a deed to the validity of which delivery is essential. And delivery is not complete without acceptance. It may then be rejected by the person to whom it is tendered. And if it is rejected, we have discovered no power in this court to force it upon him." No one could force him to accept the pardon. The result, George Wilson was hanged. Why couldn't George Wilson receive the pardon? Was it pride? Was his crime unforgivable? Is my sin or yours unforgivable? The woman in adultery qualified for mercy. Peter qualified for mercy. Judas qualified for mercy. George Wilson qualified for mercy. You and I qualify for mercy. It's easy to qualify. Just think of your worst moment. If you've got one, you qualify. But there's more to mercy than qualifying. Mercy needs to be accepted. In accepting mercy, our worst moment is transformed into our best. If we don't accept mercy, if we can't believe we have a pardon, if our pride gets in the way, if we want to be judge and jury, then we are condemned. When Andrew Chan, leader of the Bali Nine, was arrested, it wasn't his first trip to Bali as a courier. He had done it before, and he was the strong man, the leader of the group. Andrew was a drug addict and was smuggling heroin to support his own habit. He was well and truly on the way to becoming a drug lord. But at this stage, he was very much a low-level to mid-level operative. However, his conversion, while directly linked to his arrest, was not the result of his long incarceration. He came to Christ in the first week after his arrest and before going to trial. Andrew says, I grew up in a Buddhist family, so I didn't know much about Christianity. On the day I was arrested at the Bali airport, April 17, 2005, I was taken from the plane, and after a search and an initial interrogation at the airport, I was taken to the police station. They threw me into a cell on my own and were shouting at me. I thought they were going to kill me. As I didn't want to be tortured, I decided to commit suicide and end my life. I took my shirt off and tied it around my neck. I climbed up and tied the sleeves above me and was preparing to jump. It was then that I remembered going to Sunday school a couple of times with Luke, a close family friend, and I heard about heaven and hell. As I was about to jump, I knew that if there was a heaven, that's where I wanted to go. And I certainly didn't want to go to hell. As I was about to jump, I became afraid to jump, as I was afraid to go to hell. I untied the shirt and climbed down. The next day, I asked the guard for a Bible. I started to read the Bible, beginning in Genesis chapters 1 to 2, but I couldn't understand it, so I put it down. The next day, Luke came to the police station and he saw me. He had flown in from Australia, and he asked me if I'd started reading his Bible. I told him I had, but couldn't understand it, so he told me to start reading the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So I read the 4 Gospels. The next day, Luke asked me, have you read the 4 Gospels? I said, I had. And then he asked, what did you get out of it? I said, I got nothing out of it. Then as he left, he said, well, you better read them again. So I read them again. This went on for 4 days with the same question and the same answer. At the end of the 4th day, Luke asked a different question. He said, did you ask God to help you understand what you were reading? I said, no. Then Luke threw down the challenge to me. You pray and ask God to help you understand it. And if he doesn't help you, I'll come back tomorrow. When I come back tomorrow, I'll take the Bible back and we'll throw it away. But I said, I don't know how to pray. I had never prayed before. So Luke explained that it was just talking to God and asking him to help. So I did what Luke asked me to do. This time, as I read the Gospel of Mark and got as far as chapter 11, God spoke to me and he helped me to understand. In Mark 11, I read about two things that challenged my life. The first was Mark 11:12-14. Now the next day, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing from afar a fig tree having no leaves, he went to see if perhaps he could find something on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. In response, Jesus said to it, Let no one eat fruit from you ever again. And his disciples heard it. My life had been like the fig tree and was dying. My life had meant nothing. There had been no fruit. It had been useless. But I felt that God was telling me he wanted to change my life, to turn it around and make it fruitful. The second thing that God spoke to me about was having unwavering faith in him. He spoke to me through Mark 11:21. Now in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away. So Jesus answered and said to them, Have faith in God. For assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, Be moved and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes what he says will come to pass, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask for when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you will have them. The Lord was showing me that all things are possible, and that all I had to do was to believe in him without wavering. And that's what I decided to do. Before the trial, I began praying and telling the Lord, if you get me out of this and set me free, I'll serve you forever. Well, when the judge announced the death penalty, I was in shock. And I said to Luke, I told the Lord I would serve him forever if he would set me free. And Luke began thumping me on the chest and saying, he did set you free. He did set you free. In here, in your heart, he has set you free. I then understood that I was free. I might be in prison, but in my heart, I was free. I found a real salvation through Jesus Christ in prison. And the message of salvation in my life that I share with everyone can never be contained by the walls of the prison. Andrew Chan, death row, Kerabokan prison, Bali. In his worst moment, Andrew Chan meets Jesus. In mercy. Andrew is imprisoned, but he's a free man. We can be free, not in the sense that we're in prison, a physical prison, but we can be imprisoned on the inside. We can't talk about mercy without talking about the cross. It's at the cross that the exchange takes place. Sin for righteousness, guilt for freedom, rejection for acceptance, trauma for peace, condemnation for pardon. Mercy frees us. Mercy frees us to go on. Mercy liberates us. It encourages us. When we receive it, it helps us to get up again. It releases us from the grip of our accusers. It silences them. Mercy gives us hope. Mercy gives us permission to forgive ourselves and to show mercy to others. Judas didn't get that. He didn't comprehend. Or perhaps he didn't believe. Perhaps he didn't believe that he could be forgiven. So he believed a lie. Judas's unbelief ended in tragedy. He took on the role of judge, jury, and executioner. He didn't have that authority. Only Jesus has that authority. Jesus said, "Let him who is sinless throw the first stone." And Jesus is the only sinless one. It's pride to think that others can be forgiven, but I can't. It's a lie. It's pride to have a higher standard of accountability for sin than Jesus. There's no higher authority than Jesus. Jesus said, "I've been given all authority in heaven, on earth, and under the earth." No one is beyond forgiveness. No one is beyond redemption. Unless we choose to be like that. We are only beyond redemption. We are only beyond forgiveness if we choose to reject the pardon. If we choose to reject the mercy offered. Judas chose. George Wilson chose, but they chose death. Choose life. Come out of prison. While we still have breath, we are in the era of mercy. From between our birth and between our death, mercy is available. After death is judgment, not before. Mercy is always available. With every worst moment that we have, mercy is available. I want to read from an author by the name of Jacques Philippe from a book called Interior Freedom. He says, "We have no hold on the past. We can't change the smallest bit of it. People sometimes try to relive past events, considered failures. I should have done, I should have said. But those imaginary scenarios are merely dreams. It is not possible to go back. It is not possible to backtrack. The only free act we can make in regard to the past is to accept it just as it was and leave it trustingly in God's hands. All we have is the present moment. Here is the only place where we can make free acts in the present moment. In the present moment, we are truly in touch with reality. This is where God is present. I am with you always, said Jesus, to the close of the age. In the present moment, because of his infinitely merciful love, we always have the possibility of starting again. Not impeded by the past or tormented by the future. The past is in the hands of the merciful God who can draw benefit from everything. The future is in the hands of the providence of God who will never forget us. Faith keeps us from living, as many people do, oppressed by a burdensome past and a worrisome future. Living in the present permits our hearts to expand. The ladder of perfection has only one step. The step we take today. Without concerning ourselves about the past or the future, we can decide to believe today, place all our trust in God today, love God and neighbour today. Whether our good intentions or resolutions produce success or failure, next day we can begin again, not relying on our own strength, but only on God's faithfulness. I want you to put yourself in the place of the lady caught in adultery. Go before Jesus with your worst moment and listen what he says to you. Because Jesus is the same today, yesterday, and forever. He is present in this present moment, as he was present to that lady, and he is the same. He's not changed. He's saying the same to you as he says to the woman. Has no one condemned you? Nor do I condemn you. No one else is qualified to condemn you. Receive mercy. Receive my pardon. Believe in my mercy. There is no condemnation in me. When I set you free, you are free indeed. Maybe you'd like to pray this prayer with me. Nothing would please the Lord more than praying this prayer. Thank you, my God, for all my past. I firmly believe that you can draw good out of everything, even my worst moments. I believe you can bring good out of everything I have lived through. Lord, I want to have no regrets, and I resolve today to begin from zero with exactly the same trust as if all my past history were made up of nothing but faithfulness and holiness. I believe that there are people, I think there are many of us struggle with having confessed our sins, but they still haunt us because we haven't been able to receive the mercy. I can only recommend that you take John chapter 8 and read that for yourself again and again and again and again. Just sit there with the Lord and say, is this true? Is this you speaking to me? And let the truth replace the lie. Because it's only the truth that will set you free. It's only the truth that you know that will set you free. And you will only know the truth if you meditate on the truth.